With the recent success of Marvel's Infinity War, more people than ever, it's apparent that more people than ever are going to see comic book movies. The only problem is, almost everybody's going to see Marvel movies and not the DC movies. A statistic from Box Office Mojo, which is a site that keeps statistics on superhero movies, Marvel's Black Panther currently holds the record for the highest grossing comic book film ever at $696 million. Additionally, Marvel's Infinity War holds the record for the highest grossing box office weekend ever at, I believe, $296 million. But the most successful DC movie, The Dark Knight, is only in 5th place as opposed to 1st in both those categories. So, and people seeing Marvel movies way more than DC movies is bad because it makes people think that Marvel is a superior comic book publication company, which it really isn't. They're both very good at doing what they do in comics. And that's what I'm here to try to persuade you into understanding. That even though the DC movies are bad, the DC TV shows are far superior and are even comparable to the Marvel movies in their quality, the way they portray the characters, your emotional attachment to them, and just the realism of the actual shows and movies. Now, people like Marvel movies because the characters are very human in a sense. Like, you can understand a lot of times where the characters are coming from. You can kind of get into their mindset, and that's what people think is really good about the movies. But this is also true in the DC TV shows. In the show Justice League, Flash is just about the youngest member of the Justice League. And that makes him the most kind of cocky and naive. He's the kind of funny one that also gets into trouble. But that also makes him the most compassionate. In the episode Flash and Substance, we see the superhero Orion is about to beat information out of one of the Flash's villains, the Trickster. But the Flash stops him and insists that he deal with one of his villains his own way. So the Flash sits down with the Trickster, and with no violence or intimidation, he just sits down and talks to him, and just has a normal conversation with him. And it's through this conversation that the Flash finds out that the Trickster ditched his medication and has relapsed into his supervillain persona without even realizing it. So the Flash makes a deal with the Trickster. If he goes and turns himself in, he'll visit him in the hospital and play games with him. And this, of course, works perfectly. The Trickster gives up and goes and turns himself in. And this example of treating villains, or so-called villains, with humanity and respect is made even more powerful because Batman is there with the Flash while he does this. Batman being notorious for beating the crap out of villains and throwing them in Arkham to rot. Another example of this humanity is in the episode Secret Society. In this episode, the Green Lantern is upset with the Justice League's lack of teamwork, so he has them do training exercises. And some of the League members get a bit overzealous and don't really like these exercises, and one of these heroes is Superman. And almost all the exercises, he always takes the lead in the fight, always takes the full brunt of the attacks from the robots or monsters they're fighting. And Green Lantern notices this and gets mad at Superman and asks him why he doesn't rely on his teammates more. And they have a little back and forth and things get heated, and then Superman says, "They're not the ones who are invulnerable. Every hit I take is a hit that they don't have to." Of course, he said this with the best intentions in mind, but they took it the wrong way, thinking that he doesn't think they can carry their own weight. Much like in real life, when you say things, even with the best of intentions, sometimes people will take them personally and the wrong way, and that can cause lasting damage. Next is your emotional attachment to the characters. Marvel does a great job of this, having sad and humorous moments with characters. You really understand where they're coming from, with the decisions they make again. An example DC shows have a lot of emotional scenes in them. One of them is in the episode For the Man Who Has Everything. In this episode, it's Superman's birthday, and Batman and Wonder Woman go to the Fortress of Solitude to go see him, but when they get there, they find him in a completely unconscious state with a black plant on his chest. This was a surprise gift from the superhero Mongol. This plant controls the mind of the person it's attached to and puts them into a false reality that they see as perfect. Mongol jokingly insults Superman by saying, I bet he's imagining a world where he's ruling over Earth, as a complete, undisputed ruler of everything. But in Superman's reality, he's not a king or a god or even a superhero. He's just a normal guy living on a farm on an unexploded Krypton. And in this perfect reality of Superman's, he has a wife and a son, and they just live a normal life. And his son gets in trouble, but he always learns his lesson. Showing that even in Superman's perfect reality, people make mistakes so that they can learn from them. Of course, by the end of the episode, Superman realizes this is fake and that he has to leave. And he has a very emotional goodbye with his son when he realizes that he's not real and that he has to go and that we'll never see him again. So he gives his son a kiss and a hug, and then everything falls apart and he comes back to reality. Superman, of course, is upset and goes to fight Mongol. And he's just very mad and angry at Mongol. But by the end of this, they beat him, and Superman has to live with the fact that he'll never see his son again. The superheroes, of course, get shown their emotional sides, but so do some of the villains. Most notably, in the Batman TV show episode Mad Love, we see the Joker's self-appointed sidekick, Harley Quinn, go through this as well. People like to think of Harley Quinn and the Joker as a really good couple because they're one of the most famous couples in comic books, but they're not even really a couple. Harley Quinn's love for the Joker is completely one-sided, and she tolerates all of his abuse, both physical and mental. In the episode, we get a flashback to Harley before she was Harley Quinn, and her name was Harleen Quinzel. She was a psychiatrist, and she met the Joker by offering to be his psychiatrist in Arkham. And he won her over with a fake sob story about how he had an abusive father and a runaway mother, and the father was only happy once when they went to the circus. So this got Harley Quinn on his side, and in this episode, she wanted to catch Batman for the Joker, and she actually did. But Batman managed to get Harley emotional by bringing this stuff up, and she called over the Joker, and the Joker was, of course, upset that she caught Batman, and he didn't. So they got into an argument, he got physical, and then he threw her out the window of a 4-story building. And she landed in a pile of garbage and survived, but she blames herself, saying that she didn't get the joke. Unfortunately, there is no joke to get with the Joker. The joke is really on her. And some people might say this is too realistic of a situation to be in a kid's cartoon, but this can be a good lesson for kids to learn early on. And speaking of realism, the third thing that people like about Marvel movies is how realistic they are. Not really what happens, but the way the characters deal with them and how they interact with each other that's realistic. This happens in the DC shows in the episode Hereafter, where Superman dies. Now, Superman's died dozens of times, but this way is a little different. In this version, the Justice League is fighting Toyman, who is about a B or C list villain, shouldn't really be much of a problem. But Toyman has a robot that shoots a laser that's about to hit a wounded Batman and Wonder Woman, and Superman, being Superman, jumps in the way of it, and is completely vaporized. He's gone. The only thing that's left is a piece of his cape, and everybody thinks he's dead. There's a huge funeral for him that all of Metropolis goes to, and even Lex Luthor, his biggest villain, shows up and mourns him. Everybody's at the funeral except for Batman, who refuses to believe that Superman is actually dead in the full grip of denial. Of course, by the end, we find out that Batman is right and Superman is actually sent to the future. by the laser, and then he comes back. But seeing how all these characters reacted to their friend and colleague just disappearing, thinking he was dead, really shows how much of a realistic situation this is. So, in conclusion, Marvel movies do a great job of making a realistic world where the characters do things driven by emotion, and you can really understand where they're coming from and why they do these things. But the same can be said for the DC shows. And I hope I've convinced you all to believe that too. Thank you.
All right, Junior, what did you think?
Well, I found the purpose of the speech very interesting. I'm not someone that's necessarily into Marvel or DC, but I am, from what I heard, I am very interested in being persuaded to probably give it a try. I did find your strongest points in basically explaining your evidence and how they relate to people in general, or just the fact that how Marvel works in their films. And yeah, basically I would say your weakest point is probably mentioning DC, just because you want to, I'm assuming that you're trying to persuade people to view Marvel films more than DC. But other than that, I feel like you're pretty much on topic. Your eye contact was very consistent, and it seemed like you knew what you were talking about. So.
Okay. Well, I got the very different impression. I thought the impression was to try and incentivize us to give greater credence to and maybe be willing to try DC storylines. And I think that that's maybe the way you need to focus the argument. At the beginning, it's because of the introduction of the Marvel movies, I think you could use that to get attention for the subject matter, but making a comparison, I think, is a little bit problematic. I think what you want to do is you want to show that people are dismissive of DC, at least when it comes to the movies, and that there is, in fact, something that is worthwhile for us to find in the DC storylines. And maybe those aren't necessarily things that we would see in the Marvel lines, or it would be something different, but there's definitely something of value here. So what you need to do is you kind of need to give us a value criteria. What is the thing that is unique about these stories? And that is that you kind of suggest in a couple of spots, well, at the end, you know, that they're more realistic, but they're also that there are some, ideas that you don't get in the other kinds of stories. There's some social value that exists within these stories that is maybe not nearly as well represented in other places. I thought you had a pretty good preview, but to be honest, in the body of the speech, I didn't really see much structuring of that, except by the examples that you had. Everything in the main part of the speech is just another example. We've got maybe 5 or 6 storylines that get told to us without necessarily tying them into the structure that you set up in the preview. And I thought that that's a missed opportunity. I like the idea of the speech is suggesting that there is something that is different that the DC universe offers that you're not going to get other places, and that we can illustrate that with some of these stories. But all of your illustrations, for instance, are not necessarily bad, but it's all very subjective. This is the way you see it. And I don't, without any outside references, it feels a little bit thin. It's like, well, let me tell you my favorite episodes of each of these stories here and why I think it's cool or why there's something valuable about it, and then I'm going to move on. And it doesn't build much as a persuasive presentation. It just kind of sits there as a narrative of the stories. I think there's a way to do this, but I'm not exactly sure that you've gotten to that point. The delivery stuff is fine. I mean, you're talking to us, you're engaged with us, you seem like you are interested in the subject, so that part is good, but building the argument and convincing us of something, I'm not sure that you're doing that as well as you need to by just telling us about plot points in the various character stories in this universe. And it took me a while to figure out that these were all cartoons that you were talking about also. And then I finally figured it out, which maybe should have been earlier. All right.